A civil rights group wants an investigation of missing trains on a line that runs through predominantly black areas of Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and Hyde Park. Trains were reportedly diverted to make up for a shortage of cars on other lines, but the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice has asked for an investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office. To tell us about the request is the litigation director for the committee, Oren Sellstrom. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, refresh our memories about this, because the Boston Globe came up with a count, I guess, and how many missing trains there were. So how bad was this gap on the Fairmount Indigo line?
It was quite bad. I mean, in August, I think the count was 19 trains that were canceled. In September and October, something like 17 trains that were outright canceled, including one stretch of 5 days where trains were canceled every day. And so, as you can imagine, that has an enormous impact on people that depend on public transportation for work, for health care, to conduct their daily lives.
And I guess it's because this is not like bus service where something's going to be missing every now and then, but this is a scheduled route. So, I mean, the whole logic here is that if you don't like the schedule, you're out of luck. And then if they're not on schedule, that's even worse.
Well, it's absolutely right. And people come to rely on that schedule. Whole lives are structured around when the trains come, and particularly with people that need it to get to employment, people that need to get to doctor's appointments, all of that. The trains are something that people need to be able to rely on for them to be useful, and here it's just not the case.
Well, from reports in this, it looks as if the people who run the T were not happy, but the company they contract to run the trains, Keolis, they did try to justify this, saying that, look, we don't have enough cars, and there are other lines that have more riders that just happen to be in the suburbs. I mean, what about that rationale?
Well, we see that as a very poor excuse. First of all, you need to have trains that are reliable. So the whole idea of canceling trains in order to put them on another route is not the way train service should be. Second of all, it just ignores what is an obvious solution, which is make sure you have enough trains to meet your ridership, and to make sure that the trains that you have told people and people have relied on are going to be there will in fact be there. So we do not see that as any excuse at all.
Well, your request for the review here by the U.S. Attorney's Office, this is about the issue of racial justice. Explain that. I know the geography of this here, but what does that mean about people's rights to something?
Well, it does come down to the geography, because this line, the Fairmount commuter rail line, runs directly through Roxbury, Dorchester, and other predominantly communities of color. And so by canceling the trains on that line, that has a disproportionate impact on those communities. To make matters worse, the trains actually were diverted to other lines that were to whiter, more affluent ridership. And so it's literally a case of taking a resource from communities of color and putting them elsewhere in a way that is offensive to our civil rights laws.
It also looks like a line is at a vulnerable juncture in a way, because Keolis says, well, in a way, the ridership isn't that robust. And I'm thinking, is that going to somehow maybe morph into an excuse for shutting it down, maybe?
Well, it shouldn't, and that's an entirely circular argument in our view. The way that you increase ridership is to make sure that people know that the trains are going to be reliable. If you think about the commuter lines that have been around for 50 years and more, that people build their lives around that. Entire work schedules are built around when the trains come. That is the kind of reliability that is necessary to increase ridership. So it's a circular argument to say the ridership is low and therefore we're going to cancel trains. That just leads to nowhere good. What we want is for the MBTA to make good on the promises that they are making to riders, particularly riders of color, that go onto these trains, is to say when the trains are going to be there, they're going to be there as scheduled, and that's the way people come to rely on them and use them, and that's what equal opportunity is all about.
We're talking with Oren Sellstrom from Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. Oren, I want to talk about the real effect that a request like this that you've made to the U.S. Attorney's Office can have, because there are some politicians, certainly I'm sure the mayor is with the people in the neighborhoods on this, but other than that kind of political give and take, what can this kind of intervention do to make a difference?
Well, particularly in the transportation arena, it can make an enormous difference. The civil rights statute that we called for an investigation under is Title VI of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was passed by the federal government in order to make sure that any recipient of federal funding does not discriminate in any of its activities. And so what is key here is that federal funding is actually at stake. The federal government holds the purse strings on a lot of the transportation dollars in this country. And so to have federal authorities investigate and calling on recipients to be accountable can have an enormous impact, and we expect it will in this case.
And I'm sensing here maybe even a parallel with the late night service that was recently ended, and there are these indicators that who knows, maybe the team will try to come back with something else in that.
Well, that's absolutely right, and that's why the kind of advocacy that we do at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, that community allies do, is so important to push on these issues, to raise the visibility, to call out these kinds of discriminatory practices when we see them, so that there can be remedies down the line, and so that this is part of the mindset of MBTA, to think about these issues whenever any kind of service change is being enacted, whenever any kind of programming is going on, to make sure that the civil rights implications are being examined at every step of the way. We think this kind of investigation, this kind of call for action, does exactly that.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Oren Sellstrom from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. Up ahead with Chris Harding, we'll tell you about a holiday light show at Faneuil Hall Marketplace, but first, his message.